Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Mark Perry, an author and historian specializing in military, foreign affairs, and intelligence analysis, a senior analyst at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He's the author of 10 books on foreign policy and military history, including Partners in Command, 4 Stars, The Joint Chiefs of Staff, and America's Civilian Leaders, The Most Dangerous Man in America, The Making of Douglas MacArthur, and most recently, The Pentagon Wars, the military's undeclared war against America's president. He serves as a senior foreign policy analyst and political director for Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation, which founded the International Campaign to Ban Landmines and won the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize. Welcome to Background Briefing, Mark Perry.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. And you've covered the Pentagon for a long time. So what do you make of the fact that 10 living former Secretaries of Defense, all of them, signed a letter ostensibly, I guess, warning the rank and file and the country in general that the military can play no role in domestic politics, and particularly in overturning an election, which the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and Trump's short-lived National Security Advisor, General Flynn, has urged them to do. But my feeling is that there must be more to what these 10 Secretaries of Defense are afraid of. Do you get that impression?
Yes, I do, and I think you've that's exactly right. I read and reread the letter that the 10 former secretaries published. And at first, that was kind of puzzling. I thought, what are they afraid of? I don't actually think the military is going to launch a coup. So what's the problem here? And the more I read the letter, the more I realized that they had really 3 concerns. That the planned January 6th pro-Trump rally in Washington, D.C. could lead to violence, and Trump could implement the Insurrection Act to kind of end the violence. And I think they're worried about that. Secondly, I think they're worried that we could have a kind of tail wags the dog situation, where an attack on American military assets in the Middle East, let's say, speculating here that it would be by Iran, could foment a military crisis in which our U.S. military would be called on to act decisively and violently and engage us in another war. I think they're worried about that. But I think the overwhelming reason for this letter was the persistent and disturbing reports that the current acting Secretary of Defense has basically stopped the transition meetings between the outgoing administration and defense officials in the Trump administration and prospective nominees and transition officials in the Biden administration. They consider this really disturbing, and this was kind of a reminder to the acting Secretary of Defense, a man by the name of Christopher Miller, that this was unacceptable, and that he was filling the shoes of the 10 living Secretaries of Defense who look at this as kind of undermining the democratic principles that they adhere to.
Well, the Conservative British MP and chair of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee has speculated on Twitter that Trump was blocking Biden's intelligence briefings, quote, because he has a couple of significant operations up his sleeve, which might get the green light before January the 20th. What do you make of that?
I think it's possible. You know, the clock is ticking on this administration, and we have a president who, under our Constitution, has enormous powers as commander-in-chief. Under our Constitution, he's the one who dictates war and peace virtually. He doesn't need a declaration of war from the Congress to go forward with any military operations. He can simply order them. But the difficulty I think that this president is going to face, and I think this is going to come out sooner or later, is that there are those in the military who have made it clear that they will only obey lawful orders. That is to say, if the President of the United States makes a phone call to a combatant commander, a 4-star general around the world, and orders him to conduct operations that could lead to a conflict, that commander could turn to a lawyer and say, is this a legal order? Is the United States under attack? Are there threats that I'm not aware of? And he could say, very simply, he could say, Mr. President, I'm sorry, this is not a lawful order and I'm not required by law to obey it. That would form a constitutional crisis. That would be a crisis for this country. And I think the defense secretaries are very aware of that and very worried about it.
But what about this current defense secretary, Christopher Miller?
Well, he's acting Secretary of Defense, and it is true that he is in the line in the chain of command. So he would be able to intervene. We don't know much about Mr. Miller. We know that he's quite conservative, but there's nothing in his background that says that he would automatically obey an order from a president that would take us to war. But still, it's concerning. And I think it's concerning enough that somebody like Dick Cheney, who actually organized this letter and had it published and recruited the former defense secretaries, I think he's worried enough. I mean, this is Dick Cheney.
Right, and Rumsfeld signed it too.
And Rumsfeld signed it too. These aren't exactly pacifists or progressives. These are men who have used military power for political ends and had no compunction about doing so. So the disturbance here and the worry, it seems to me, must go quite deep. This letter was aimed really at the acting Secretary of Defense under Mr. Trump, this man, Christopher Miller.
And again, I'm speaking with Mark Perry, who's an author and historian specializing in military foreign affairs and intelligence analysis. He's a senior analyst at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and the author of 10 books on foreign policy and military history, including Partners in Command, 4 Stars, The Joint Chiefs of Staff and America's Civilian Leaders, The Most Dangerous Man in America, The Making of Douglas MacArthur, and most recently, The Pentagon Wars, the military's undeclared war against America's president. He served as a senior foreign policy analyst and political director for Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation, which founded the international campaign to ban landmines and won the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize. So clearly, then, this letter from the 10 former Secretaries of Defense is directed at the current acting Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, but it's also directed at the rank and file, isn't it, to remind them that their oath is to the Constitution, not to the president.
Yes, that's absolutely right. They are not to intervene in political affairs or be political in any way. We saw in June of last year, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, walk from the White House next to Trump to the church across the street, a very political act. It seemed an act designed to place him in good stead with the President of the United States. It was an act that General Milley later regretted and actually apologized. I don't recall the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff apologizing to the rank and file, to the enlisted personnel in the military for a political act, but he did so. So it's clear that the military is very aware of this, but if they needed a reminder, they certainly got it from this published letter. This was very, very high profile in a national publication from a cross-section of Secretaries of Defense, many of whom I think you mentioned, Secretary Rumsfeld wouldn't have signed on to this letter unless they were deeply disturbed about what might happen over the next 2 weeks. That is from now, January 6th, until the inauguration of the new president takes place.
Well, it's pretty obvious that something's going on in the Gulf and in the Middle East, because Trump ordered Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller to reverse course. Miller had ordered the U.S. aircraft carrier Nimitz to return from its station off Iran in the Indian Ocean, and then Trump overruled him and sent it back. The Israelis have sent in a nuclear-armed submarine, and the U.S. has sent in a nuclear attack submarine with Tomahawk missiles into the Gulf itself, which is unusual. Iran just seized a South Korean ship, and there's all kinds of, rallies going on in Iraq on the 1-year anniversary of the killing of the general in charge of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, Soleimani.
Right.
And apparently the Iranians are moving a lot of military equipment into Iraq. So, let's face it, we have a mentally ill president. If anybody with a reasonable, open mind reads the transcripts of the conversation that he had with the Secretary of State in Georgia, trying to force this man into overturning an election that Biden won. And it's clear that Trump is delusional and also reckless and dangerous and has no concept of democratic principles. So that's bad enough. But the Iranian leadership are pretty crazy too. I mean, they're into martyrdom. It's a theocracy led by a guy who thinks he talks to God.
Right.
So this is a pretty explosive situation.
Yeah, in the military, this is called climbing the escalatory ladder, and that's what we've seen over the last few days. First, the acting Secretary of Defense ordered, as you mentioned, ordered the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier into the Gulf, then ordered it out. Then, under orders from Trump, decided to leave it there. We have a submarine there, as you noted. The Iranians are not being careful about this escalatory ladder. They have a grudge to bear against the United States, as you noted, with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. So here we are. We're in a situation where one step in the wrong direction could lead to a confrontation. That's all bad news. The good news is that our commander in the region, General McKenzie, the head of the U.S. Central Command, is known for his diligence, care, and prudence in these kinds of affairs. Yet, as I noted earlier in the interview, the President of the United States has enormous power under the Constitution to wage war. And so here we are in a seeming showdown, not just with the Iranians, but perhaps between the President of the United States and the U.S. military, which, should run chills up our spines of all Americans. And we're faced with a president who you have speculated, and I would join with you, seems to be mentally off balance. It is, that is to say, a very dangerous time for the country.
Well, this mentally ill president is just awarding the Medal of Freedom to Devin Nunes and Jim Jordan. And of course, it's Devin Nunes' proteges that Trump sent over to the Department of Defense that are blocking Biden's briefings. Yeah. So the fact that they're preventing Biden from getting briefings on the latest national security information and military situation around the world, particularly with the tension in the Gulf, leads a lot of people to speculate that they're up to something. That's a reasonable speculation, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm always looking for kind of historical handholds here. And I remember during the days of Watergate, when Richard Nixon was walking around the White House late at night talking to the portraits of former presidents, that the Secretary of Defense at the time, Mr. Schlesinger, James Schlesinger, left word with military commanders that any orders from the president should be passed by him before being implemented. He was very disturbed that a president, an emotionally distraught president, would be passing on orders that were clearly illegal. I think we're going to see, if we get through this time intact, I think we're going to see at the end of January, beginning of February, a spate of reports what the military is doing and thinking about and what steps they're taking to make sure that orders that are passed through the chain of command are legal. I'd be willing to bet a lot that the military is as uncomfortable with this as with anything that's ever happened in our history, and that they're on alert to make sure that any orders that are passed down are legal. I don't have evidence of this, but I feel confident that there are enough, and I hope that there are enough rational figures in our chain of command in our military, and there are, that would take great care over the next 14 days to make sure that things are done properly and that this nation isn't moved into a period of unwanted conflict.
But we don't have Schlesinger as Secretary of Defense as was the case when Nixon was going off the rails. We have Christopher Miller, who so far he's put in there by Trump, who fired Esper because Esper wanted to change the names of the U.S. military bases from the names after these Confederate generals who were essentially traitors. And that apparently upset Trump because he's got some peculiar loyalty to the Confederacy and to white nationalists who support the Confederacy.
True.
So we don't have, I mean, we've talked about Christopher Miller and we just don't know what kind of a guy he is. You said he's conservative, but he is, at the end of the day, he served in the military. He must understand that he serves the Constitution, not the president.
Yes, that's right. And I wouldn't want to characterize him falsely here. He's not he's a conservative, but he isn't known, doesn't have a reputation as in any sense irrational at all. So I give him, that's, the bar is low. And the other thing, and you know this as well as anybody, this is Washington, D.C. I would bet that somebody like Jim Mattis or Mark Esper or Donald Rumsfeld or somebody somewhere is probably on the phone with Christopher Miller saying, Mr. Secretary, these are dangerous times. I mean, this is the way that Washington works. It's not without its, I suppose that Trump would call it the swamp. But
right,
it's not,
the deep state, the back channels.
Yeah, there are back channels everywhere, and there are people talking all the time, and putting their arms around each other and nodding knowingly. And I think that Christopher Miller, I think that this letter from the 10 secretaries is the least of what he's dealing with. I'm sure that he's been told quietly that these are dangerous times. He ought to know it himself without being reminded. But my bet is that there are a lot of people weighing in right now, and weighing in seriously.
Well, we, the public, now have heard the tape of Trump trying to get the Secretary of State of Georgia to overturn an election, and Trump is clearly delusional, and he's acting like a mob boss, threatening this guy and basically ordering him to fund 11,800 votes. That is bad enough for a regular American civilian to swallow. So I know this Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, has probably had face-to-face meetings with Trump, so he must know that Trump is out of his depth and out of his mind. So I guess we just have to hold our breath.
Well, I think it's this is if we get through this, knock on wood, I do believe we will. But this is I think an appropriate lesson for us, if possible, when Trump leaves office, to kind of review this, how we conduct ourselves, how we conduct our foreign policy, how we conduct our electoral politics, and that it might not be a good idea for the President of the United States to have the power over the military that he does, and that maybe there ought to be some circuit breakers put in place in the future for just such a circumstance of a President of the United States who's obviously off balance, and whether we ought to be able by law to place such power in the hands of a president who's off balance, and a review of these policies, no first use, for instance, or launch on warning of nuclear weapons, this kind of thing. This is a very, very dangerous. And new laws, new regulations, new ways of countering irrational acts can be put in place and ought to be put in place. The question is, with this kind of a Congress and this kind of a Senate, where you have Republican Trumpinistas lining up with a president who's obviously lost his center stripe, whether that kind of reform can be done, but it ought to be done.
Well, Mark Perry, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
And again, I've been speaking with Mark Perry, who's an author and historian specializing in military, foreign affairs, and intelligence analysis. He's a senior analyst at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and the author of 10 books on foreign policy and military history, including Partners in Command, 4 Stars, The Joint Chiefs of Staff and America's Civilian Leaders, The Most Dangerous Man in America, The Making of Douglas MacArthur, and most recently, The Pentagon's Wars, the military's undeclared war against America's president, and he served as a senior foreign policy analyst and political director for Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation, which founded the International Campaign to Ban Landmines and won the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize. This has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters. I'd like to thank producer Graham Fitzgibbon, and this program is available for podcasting at backgroundbriefing.org, where you can sign up for our email updates as well as subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you like this program, you can help us reach more listeners by taking a moment to rate and review us on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please do share the program with friends and family and colleagues on Twitter and Facebook. And to help us sustain our mission and spread the word to keep us corporate-free and commercial-free, we have added a donate button. So if you're in a position to give support, please take a moment to visit backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible contributions will help us continue to build a reality-based community in post-truth America. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing. Bye for now.